And we've got some really interesting stuff to cover.
Yeah, looks like we've got a good mix. Again, a recent result to break down, and then a big game coming up this weekend that, I'm actually really looking forward to getting into.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one. So we've got that Genoa-Udinese game from just the other day to kick things off, and then we'll dig into all the juicy details about Roma and Juventus facing off on Sunday.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, so first up, Genoa pulling off that 1-0 win over Udinese. Pretty massive for them, eh?
Absolutely. I mean, every point matters at this stage of the season, right? Especially for a team like Genoa battling to stay up.
Exactly, and this win, nudges them a bit closer to that kind of magic 40-point mark. The report calls it that fatidica quota 40.
Yeah, that's the number.
Yeah.
Right, kind of like the benchmark for safety.
Yeah, pretty much everyone figures if you hit 40 points, you're probably good to stay in Serie A for another season. And for Genoa to get their 5th win in 6 home games this year, that's got to feel huge for them.
For sure it is. I mean, especially at the stage of the season, turning your home ground into a fortress like that can make all the difference.
Right. So how about that late winner, though? Zanoli's goal right at the death must have been pretty dramatic.
Oh, absolutely. It was. And, you got to give Genoa credit for just, keeping pushing, even when it was, getting late in the game. But the report kind of contrasts that with how Udinese played, saying they only showed intensity in, fits and starts. Not exactly the same Udinese side that battled it out with Inter Milan a few weeks back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what makes football so exciting, but also so frustrating, right? You never quite know what you're going to get from a team week to week.
I guess so. Yeah, it's true. And it makes it tough for coaches, too, trying to, get that consistency out of their players.
Well, and speaking of frustrating, let's talk about those missed chances for Udinese because, wow, that Lucca miss in particular, just brutal, right? Wide open goal, and he puts it wide.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, sometimes the ball just doesn't want to go in. But at this level, you got to bury those chances.
Yeah.
Especially when it's such a tight game.
And then you've got that Modesto goal that was disallowed because Lucca was offside in the buildup. It's like nothing was going their way.
And it's funny because the report actually mentions how Udinese's coach had set this ambitious target of 50 points for the season.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but with this latest loss, which is their 3rd in a row, by the way.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's starting to look like they might need to rethink things a bit,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these dropped points, they can really add up, especially when you're chasing a European spot.
That's right.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at how Genoa is set up tactically, because the report mentions Thorsby playing out on the left, and then you've got Malinovsky sort of pulling the strings behind Pinamonti and Zanoli.
Yeah, it seems like Genoa's coach went for a little bit of a different look this time around. Maybe trying to, exploit something specific about Udinese's setup or just, give them a different look.
Yeah, and Martin was back in defense on the left side, so they've clearly got some flexibility in how they approach these games.
Absolutely, and I think that adaptability is something we've seen more and more from teams throughout Serie A this season. Being able to tweak your tactics, depending on the opponent, that can give you a real edge.
Right, makes sense. Okay, so on the Udinese side of things, a couple of notable absences. Thauvin and Sanchez both out, and I think you could see that they were missed.
For sure. Those guys are key attacking threats for Udinese, and their absence definitely had an impact.
And their coach decided to start Ihizabu over Christensen in defense, with Zaraga getting the nod in midfield after looking pretty sharp coming off the bench last time out.
It seems like he's still searching for the right mix, trying to find that balance between defensive solidity and attacking spark.
Yeah, it's a constant puzzle for coaches, isn't it? Especially when you're dealing with injuries or suspensions.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
I mean, it can really disrupt your plans and force you to make adjustments you might not have necessarily wanted to make.
So the early going in this match, it seemed like Genoa came out with a lot of energy, really put the pressure on Udinese, especially out wide.
Yeah, they did. They started really brightly. And that early chance for Thorsby, if he'd put that away, it could have been a completely different game.
Right. But Okoye, the Udinese keeper, came up with a big save there.
He did. He kept them in it. And the report highlights how well Genoa's midfielders, Massini and Frendrup, controlled things in that first half.
Yeah.
They really limited what Udinese could do in the middle of the park.
Yeah, that midfield battle is often so crucial, and Genoa definitely won that one in this game.
Absolutely, they did. And it's interesting because when Udinese did have those moments where they broke through on the counterattack, they just couldn't make it count.
Yeah, those missed opportunities really hurt them, like that sequence where Lucca and Iker Bravo both got shut down. I mean, they had Genoa stretched, but just couldn't capitalize.
Sometimes that's all it takes, right?
Right.
Just one moment of brilliance or maybe just a bit of luck, and the whole game swings in your favor.
And it wasn't just those missed chances for Udinese. They also had that Lucca goal ruled out for a foul on the Winter in the first half. Those VAR decisions can be so tricky.
Yeah, sometimes, it's like millimeters, right? And they can completely change the complexion of the game.
And then you've got that incredible miss from Lucca early in the second half. I mean, Gaeta puts it on a plate for him, basically, an open goal, and somehow he manages to put it wide.
I know, it's hard to believe, right? I mean, those are the kind of chances that can make or break a season.
Okay, so even though Genoa were missing some chances of their own, they were still consistently creating more clear-cut openings, like that Zanoli cross to Pinamonti. His shot wasn't great, but still another opportunity.
Yeah, they were definitely the more dangerous side throughout the game, and you could see that they were starting to believe that they could get that winning goal.
And both managers made some changes in the second half. Genoa brought on Onana for Massini, trying to freshen things up in midfield, and Udinese replaced Ekkelenkamp with Piero out on the left wing.
I think those substitutions were pretty telling. Genoa trying to shore things up a bit, and Udinese pushing for an equalizer.
And then came that big moment for Leali, the Genoa goalkeeper, making a huge save to deny Modesto.
Yeah, that save was massive. It kept them level, and then almost immediately Genoa went up the other end and scored.
Yeah, that counterattack was clinical. Ekuban getting to the byline and then cutting it back for Zanoli to finish with a lovely diagonal shot.
It was a fantastic team goal, and it showed just how dangerous Genoa can be on the break.
And even with all that, there was still time for more drama. Modesto thought he'd snatched a point for Udinese in stoppage time, but VAR intervened again.
Yeah, he was just offside, wasn't he? I mean, talk about a heartbreaker for Udinese.
So all in all, a really important win for Genoa and another frustrating afternoon for Udinese. I think there are definitely some questions they need to answer about their consistency.
Yeah, they need to find a way to string together some positive results and quickly if they want to achieve their goals for the season.
All right, so now let's switch gears and talk about this huge clash coming up this Sunday, Roma taking on Juventus. And this one has got massive implications for the Champions League race.
Absolutely massive. It's going to be fascinating to see how these two teams match up, especially with so much on the line.
Yeah, and our second source today is the Daily Serie A podcast, and they are hyping this one up as a true test of both teams' ambitions.
They're right to do so. I mean, this game could really go a long way in determining who finishes in those top four spots.
Right. And Roma's turnaround this season has been pretty remarkable. They weren't exactly setting the world on fire early on, but now they're right in the mix for a Champions League place.
Yeah, it's been a really impressive transformation. They've clearly found something that works, and they're playing with a lot of confidence.
But the podcast makes a good point that Roma's schedule is about to get a whole lot tougher, starting with this Juventus game. They even called it the beginning of a terrifying run of fixtures.
Yeah, it's true. They've got some really challenging games coming up against some of the best teams in the league.
Right, and to add to that, it sounds like Dybala might not be fit for this one, which would be a huge blow.
Yeah, he's such a creative force for them, so to lose him for a game like this would be a real setback.
But even with that potential absence, there are a lot of positive things happening at Roma right now. The team spirit seems to be fantastic, and their coach is getting a lot of praise for how he's turned things around.
Yeah, and the fact that they've managed to kind of shut out all the noise surrounding the club and those rumors about a new coach coming in next season, it's really impressive.
Yeah, it shows a real focus and determination. And that win against Lecce last week, that was another big one for them. A late goal on the road in a tough game. It shows they've got that resilience.
Yeah, for sure. It does. And now we'll really get to see what they're made of against Juventus and then in the derby after that.
Okay, so let's talk about Juventus because it sounds like the pressure is really on them now with the new coach coming in.
Yeah. Every game is an exam now for them. They need to prove that they're capable of being that dominant force again.
And they got off to a winning start against Genoa. But the podcast host made a good point that this game against Roma, it's a whole different animal.
It is, yeah. Playing at home against Genoa is one thing, but going to the Stadio Olimpico and facing a Roma side that's firing on all cylinders, that's a completely different challenge.
Yeah, it's a huge test for Juventus and for their new coach. And a bad result here could really send them spiraling.
Yeah, it could. And it makes this game even more intriguing because both teams genuinely believe they can win.
I think that's what makes this matchup so exciting. You've got two sides who are playing well and who are both desperate for the win.
It's going to be a battle.
It is. And it's funny because when you look back at their first meeting this season back in August, it was actually a pretty underwhelming affair.
Yeah, a lot has changed since then, hasn't it?
Yeah, both of these teams have gone through so much, and it's almost like they've each had 2 or 3 mini seasons all rolled into one.
Yep. Exactly. And for Juventus in particular, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. You had those unexpected defeats against Empoli in the Cup and PSV Eindhoven in Europe, which really exposed some weaknesses.
Yeah, it really felt like there were some deeper issues there beyond just a lack of fitness or something like that.
Absolutely. But the good news for Juventus fans is that it sounds like those internal problems have been addressed, at least to some extent.
Yeah, and the players seem to be responding well to the new coach.
That's what you want to see, right? That renewed sense of energy and optimism.
Okay, but we also have to be careful about reading too much into one game, right? Even though Juventus won against Genoa, it wasn't like they were suddenly back to their all-conquering best.
No, it wasn't. And that's the point the podcast host was making. Let's not get carried away just yet. Let's see how they perform against tougher opposition over a longer period of time.
Right, and realistically, we're probably going to see more of the same from Juventus, tactically at least for now.
Yeah.
The new coach is going to want to build on what was already there and maybe make some subtle adjustments.
Yeah, I think that's a smart approach. Don't try to change everything overnight. Just focus on getting the basics right and building from there.
And what's interesting about Roma is that they've shown this ability to win games even when they're not playing their best football. Like that Lech game, Angelino and Dovbyk weren't exactly at their sharpest, but they still found a way to get the win.
Yeah, those are the kind of victories that can really galvanize a team.
Yeah.
When you can grind out results like that, it shows a lot of character.
Okay, so zooming out a bit and looking at the bigger picture in Serie A, we've got a lot of direct clashes coming up between teams fighting for those European spots and teams trying to avoid relegation.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting end of the season, that's for sure. And I think we could see a lot of cagey games, a lot of draws.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Teams don't want to risk too much when so much is at stake.
Exactly. And it's not just about those head-to-head matches either. Those games against the so-called easier opponents, they're going to be just as important.
Yeah, you can't afford any slip-ups at this stage of the season.
No, you can't. And the podcast used Roma's game against Napoli on Monday as a good example. That's a game where Roma will be expected to get a result, but Napoli are no pushovers.
Right, so even those games that might look straightforward on paper, they can be potential banana skins.
Absolutely. And when you look at the remaining fixtures, it seems like Juventus might actually have a slightly easier run-in compared to Roma.
Yeah, they've got those tough games against Roma, Bologna, and Lazio, but apart from that, their schedule looks a bit more manageable.
Yeah, and that's why this game on Sunday is so crucial for Roma. They need to get the win here to put themselves in the driving seat.
Exactly, and for Juventus, it's all about avoiding defeat. A draw wouldn't be a disaster for them.
No, it wouldn't. But a win would be a huge statement.
It would. And we can't forget about Atalanta either.
Yeah.
The podcast made a good point that they're still very much in the Champions League mix.
Yeah, they've had a bit of a dip in form recently, but you can never write them off.
Right. And they've got some really tough games coming up. Lazio, Bologna, Milan. If they don't pick up some points soon, they could start to drift away.
And the podcast was saying that the magic number for Champions League qualification this season could be around 70 or 71 points.
So the race is definitely on.
It is. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Okay, so before we wrap up, just to kind of sum up what we've talked about today, we had that Genoa-Udinese game where Genoa grabbed a vital win, and Udinese, well, let's just say they need to find a way to be more clinical.
Yeah, they do. And that game on Sunday between Roma and Juventus, it's absolutely massive. Both teams have a lot to play for, and it's going to be a real clash of styles.
Right. Roma with their newfound momentum and attacking flair, and Juventus with that new coach bounce and, that kind of steely determination to prove they're still the team to beat in Serie A.
It's going to be a fascinating tactical battle, and I think it could come down to who handles the pressure better.
Yeah, and I think that leads to a really interesting question for our listeners to think about. Given everything we've discussed today, all the storylines, all the different factors at play, what do you think will be the deciding factor in that Roma-Juventus game? What's the one thing that will tip the scales one way or the other?
It's a great question, and I honestly can't wait to see how it plays out.
I know, me too. This is going to be a good one.
It is.